Berkeley Historical Society. I'm sitting here with Florence Jury in her home, and we are going to be videotaping her for the benefit of the Society. Today's date is September 15th, 1989. Flo, want to tell us what you're doing?
Well, I'm sitting here at my dining room table where I cut the local papers every day to go into the archives of the Berkeley Historical Society. And right now there is an interesting case which is in the headlines everywhere in California, I believe, and that's a case of Zambrano, who has been now arrested and is in jail here. And then there is the dog that the city council has finally decided is politically correct and can be used to sniff out dope. And it's important to have a politically correct dog to sniff out the dope. And this reminds me that articles that were published in the Berkeley Gazette were collected several years ago, and eventually they were put into our book. What is the name of the book? Exactly Opposite the Golden Gate. And every article in it was published first in the Berkeley Gazette. And I worked on the Berkeley Gazette for 12 years, a good number of years ago. And I feel rather sad that the Gazette is no longer in existence. But it apparently served a good purpose in that we have the recollection in our book, which came out in 2,000 copies in hardcover and has been reissued in paperback. The first edition sold out very well, and the other one is selling very well. It's a kind of timeless book for anyone who loves Berkeley and wants to give somebody a present or just have a copy himself. The Berkeley Voice comes out every Thursday, and I get 2 copies of it because I clip almost every article in it to put in the archives of the Berkeley Gazette. The Berkeley Gazette, no. What am I talking about?
The file
of the Berkeley Historical Society. And this article I'm clipping now is the one on the arrest of Zambrano. And I'll also clip the article on the politically correct drug-sniffing dog. And there's another big job that I've been working on for a year for the archives. Because back in the late 30s and part of the 40s, there was a man on the Berkeley Gazette whose name was Hal Johnson, an old, very good newspaper man, and he had been city editor. And then he began to write a column every day called, can't remember right now what it was called. Anyway, somebody clipped every one of those articles and eventually Xeroxed them, but 2 articles on each 8.5 by 11 page, and the runover, and most articles had a runover, also 2 of them on another page. So they all have to be cut apart and put together again as separate articles. And that takes a long time, but the articles are extremely interesting. Most of them are about people, and Hal did an awfully good job of research and putting incidents in the lives of these people together in an interesting fashion. And they will be a very good resource for anyone doing all kinds of research on Berkeley history. But I still have quite a time to go on that because it takes about 15 minutes to do each page. That brings me back to my days on the Gazette, which were 12 years, and I was a proofreader. But the Gazette had no city desk, really, and so the proof room did a lot of editing. And in newspapers, the thing was that the composing room, meaning all of the mechanical, the printers and everybody else in the composing room, had to follow the copy which was brought to it, even out the window, as they said, if it went out the window. And certainly nobody ever could correct the lead editorial. And we did that all the time because the editor had some difficulties with the English language. One of his favorite phrases was nipping the tide in the bud, and we couldn't let that sort of thing go through. And then the Gazette was a very successful, money-making affair, I guess, and it was owned by Charles Dunscombe, who was a very conservative Republican. One might almost say he was the soul of the Republican Party in Berkeley, along with two or three others who were equally hidebound. And it's interesting to note that all of California, I think, went for Roosevelt in his first election, except Berkeley. It went Republican. So, but Mr. Dunscombe was an interesting, very nice man in spite of his attitudes. Of course, I didn't believe anything that he believed in. And you had to admire him because he was a man of his word, even though you didn't really like his word. And he was extremely nice to have around because I've never seen a person better groomed than he was. And he treated the Gazette like his own child. He and his wife had no children. And he paid very poor wages. There were no unions until the Wagner Act in 1937, I think it was. But he was always good for a loan if anybody needed money, and which he sometimes forgot about.
And where you lived. You remember when you came back to Berkeley and you lived in that apartment? That was
right over here on top of Virginia Street.
Yeah, that you described so beautifully in the article. I mean, it was $25 a month, and it was just this. Do you remember what it looked like?
Oh, sure, I remember what it was.
Yeah, because that was terrific. And
well, I'll just talk about when I came back to Berkeley in 1932.
Okay, that's a whole year that you've written a lot about, and.
All right. In 1932, I came back from Portland, where I had finished law school, and Mr. Dunscombe had promised me my old job back in the proofroom at the Gazette, and I decided I better find out where I was going to live. I was staying at the Carlton Hotel, and I looked in the Berkeley Gazette want ads, which were very copious in those days. Everybody advertised in the Gazette. And I found this apartment on the top of Virginia Street. I'll never forget the address, 2711. It's some kind of a significance. It's a gambling term, isn't it? 2711, something like that. Anyway, I never saw the landlady, but she rented me this apartment for $25 a month. And it was built on the hill so that you went up a few steps from the street, and there was one apartment on that floor, and the next floor had two apartments, and I had the one on the east side. And the top floor had two apartments also. And there was an entrance hall, a living room, a dining room with a corner red brick fireplace, and a kitchen which entered into the back garden, and then a dressing room and a bathroom. And at the front of the apartment was a sleeping porch from which I had a view of South Berkeley. And after I'd been there a few months, I wrote to the landlady and said that it would be nice if she reduced the rent to $22.50 a month, which she did. Now, well, lots of things happened during the Depression. Of course, the Depression was not very pleasant for anybody, but there were interesting things. There were all kinds of people. Most of them, it seemed to me, were fellow travelers or card-carrying communists. And then there were people who didn't say what they thought. But there were a number of interesting people. I remember I had a roommate for part of that time, and she was working in San Francisco for $15 a week at a lithography establishment. She was also the editor of a small poetry magazine that was published in San Francisco. And her $15 a week and my $25 a week made it possible for us to live very well. And so when we joined forces, we found a carriage house. It wasn't a barn, it was a carriage house that had been moved from, we understood, from College and Dwight Way down to Durant and Ellsworth and behind a great big house. And it was a wonderful place to entertain. We paid $40 a month for that. It had a 40 by 40 foot living room, and it had a bedroom downstairs and a kitchen. It did have running water, but no heat. It had a fireplace, and you entered from a little porch to a wide hall that ran straight through the building. At the other end, opposite the front door, was two steps up to a platform, and then you made a sharp turn to the right, and there was practically a ship's ladder going to the second floor. It wasn't quite, but the second floor had the bathroom and one big bedroom. And the landlady, the woman who owned it, had reserved part of the building as a place to store all kinds of things so that she could come and go as she pleased. But she was a very nice little old lady, so we didn't mind that. And I remember my roommate was a good poet herself, and she read beautifully. And so once a month, we would invite our friends to come for a reading of poetry. And all of our friends did come. And then I remember the New York, no, not the New York, the NBC Symphony began its career on radio, conducted by Toscanini. And it started on a Sunday afternoon, the very first performance. And so we had open house, and all kinds of people came. That was fun. I'm getting tired.
You know, eventually we want to talk about the fire. So you want to do that when Jackie comes in, when you start?
Yeah, it's
That
all
would
right.
be a time.
You want
But,
to hear about the 3,000 communists who were coming
I
down?
was going to ask you about the hunger march. Yeah,
That wasn't. I never did find out what they were going to do, but this was very funny.
Yeah, that would be.
One day it was announced by, I think, the managing editor or the editor of the Gazette that 3,000 communists were going to come down Strawberry Canyon and march through the city. Now, I'm not kidding. There was a meeting at Berkeley High in which this was announced. And it was also suggested that people who didn't approve of communism sort of police this affair. And I had a friend who had kept his ROTC, what was it?
Something he wore? Or?
No, his commission.
Oh, okay.
And so he was going around that evening speaking to or receiving reports from the men who were patrolling individual neighborhoods. And his wife was a friend of mine too. She was so amused that she asked me to go with them while she drove him around to these various corners. And I remember at the corner of Derby and College, this elderly man who had 2 walking sticks with him came up to the car and saluted and said, "All's quiet." Mm-hmm. So after that we went home. But that was one of the sillier things that happened during the 30s. And then of course there was the general strike. And later in I think it was the summer of 1940, there was a labor school conducted at the Pacific School of Religion. And I think it was under the auspices of the ILGWU, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, because their educational director, a little, very dynamic gal, and Dr. George Headley were sort of running this school. And I decided that that would be interesting to go to because it was in the summer and it was going to be, I could manage to get off work. I think it was late in the afternoon, something like that. But I do remember sitting on the lawn outside the Pacific School of Religion, which is still there, of course, listening to lectures. And I remember the professor of public speaking at Cal was one of the faculty members, and there were union members from all over Northern California. I can't remember how many, maybe 40 people. And there were 2 men there, both longshoremen, one of whom had been shot during Bloody Thursday and the general strike in the city. And that was interesting. I'd never met so many union people. And Dr. George Headley was a most interesting man. He was brilliant. He was an ordained minister. I can't remember, I think of the Congregational Church. He didn't seem to have a church then. And he conducted a class earlier in this 1940 labor school under the auspices of the, whatever the organization was, educational, under WPA, I guess. It was education was in probably educational agency or something of the sort. And I remember going to that. And he was, well, not too respectable, according to the climate in Berkeley, but he ended up as chaplain of Mills College. And he was a brilliant man and very, very nice. And he used to come down after classes in the labor school to the corner of Euclid and Ridge Road, where there's now a, I guess it's a place where you can buy notebooks and that sort of thing. But in those days, it was a restaurant. And we could go there and sit and have coffee, so forth. Probably coffee for 10 cents a cup. Unions felt much freer then than they ever had before because they had the protection of the Wagner Act. Okay. And of course, I felt that the Berkeley Gazette should be unionized too. The whole mechanical department of the Gazette was union, except the proofroom. And in any other newspaper, the proofroom was also unionized. But somehow or other, it had slipped through. And Mr. Dunscombe kept the Gazette proofroom as a kind of plum to give out to anyone he wanted to. Well, of course, I was the recipient of it for 3 different times, and I suppose I should have been loyal, according to him. But I felt that working for $25 a week, when everybody around me was making more, that wasn't right. And the regular union wage at that time, I think for the day shift, was 10 and a quarter, and for the night shift, it was 10.75 probably.
What is that? A week? I mean,
a day.
A day.
Yeah. And so I just decided that he couldn't fire me if I tried to unionize the proofroom. And I did, but I didn't, it was a Pyrrhic victory. The Gazette had a unionized proofroom, but I was no better off than I had been before.
Why is that?
Because, as far as the union was concerned, one of the 2 of us, and the woman who was the other proofreader, had taken my place when I left after my second sojourn in the proof department. I was in charge of it then. She took it, and so I was her assistant when I came back in 1932. And I told her that I would concede the priority to her if she would take an extra day off a week. She could work only 5 days, and the Gazette was published 6 days. So if she took an extra day off, giving her 4 days a week, and at more than she was making then, I would concede the priority to her. Well, she said yes, but she didn't do it. So I was left with Saturday, which she couldn't work, and then Thursday nights when the Gazette put out the shopping news. I worked the swing shift. No, not swing shift, night shift, from 10 o'clock to morning. So I was still making about $25 a week. But in the meantime, I worked for WPA. And that was a fascinating job because I had a friend who, from college, who was in charge of the County Record Survey for Northern California. And the County Record Survey was for putting together each county's history of how many officers it had and what their duties were and so forth. And the people who worked at 416 Market Street, which was the headquarters, were some of them lawyers and some of them just people who could read and write, so to speak. And people in the field went into the county courthouses and, or basements or wherever they stored their materials and copied out, for instance, however many officers Sonoma County had. And the state law provided that not all counties had to have the same number of people working. In other words, Alpine County certainly didn't need as many bodies working as treasurer, as county assessor, and that sort of thing as Los Angeles County, for instance. And so it was provided that they could combine some of these offices, which the smaller counties did. And that was the raw material for an essay on each county. And these people in the San Francisco office had written a master essay speaking of every single office of the county, and then they adapted the material from the counties to an essay. Unfortunately, only about 3 or 4 counties, I think, were ever published, and that material would be very interesting, and it's languishing probably in a federal warehouse someplace. But I went to work there because my friend Thelma wanted somebody who knew something about law and something about English grammar. And so I was working, as I say, just one day and one night a week. And on WPA you worked 96, I think it was 96 hours a month. And so only once, I think, did I come home from the Gazette in the morning and have to shower and change and get to the city to work that day. Only once in the 10 months. And of course, it was winding down that I worked there 10 months and then the WPA stopped. But it gave me, I was non-certified, which meant I got $96 a month, I think.
You want to say what the WPA was? You know, some people...
Works Progress Administration. Yeah. And it was a lifesaver for millions of people all over this country. It was a WPA project that built the Berkeley Rose Garden. And
that was during the Depression.
During the Depression. There were all kinds of organizations. There was the one for the theater, and I saw some wonderful theater in San Francisco done by people on relief. But anyhow, my sojourn with the WPA in the city was extremely interesting because the first morning I went there, I was on the 2nd or 3rd floor of this old building on 416 Market Street, and a very handsome young man, or middle age, he seemed sort of young, man came to the elevator, and I thought, he's in charge of the place, and he escorted me to the other side of the room and showed me my desk. And I found out afterwards he had been suspended from the bar. He was Sally Stanford's ex-husband, and he'd been suspended or disbarred for trying to bribe a federal juror. Well, Sally Stanford was probably one of the most notorious madams in San Francisco. And she was married to this man who had been a lawyer. As a matter of fact, I think he was once DA in Alpine County, which certainly wouldn't amount to much of a job, I should think. Anyhow, he was very suave, and he was not above trying to bribe a juror. And now, wait a minute. The case was, yeah, that was a violation of the Mann Act. I can't remember the details, but I think somebody was being tried for violation of the Mann Act, which is, I haven't heard of a trial of the Mann Act.
What is that?
Well, that was the federal law against taking a woman, across the state line for illegal sex, something like that. No. Anyway, it was a case tried in the federal court. I think maybe it was Sally Stanford's brother who had picked up a girl in Nevada or someplace and brought her to San Francisco to put her in Sally's house. And it was probably the evidence was overwhelming, and so the only way, I suppose, her ex-husband could find to defeat the allegations was by bribing a juror. And that isn't done. At least the courts don't look very favorably on it. Anyhow, he was either suspended or disbarred, I'm not sure which. Very charming man. I guess that's all I have to say about the Depression, except that it was a time of a lot of fun. We had my group of friends had a party every Saturday night at somebody's house, mostly the Maybeck, Jack's house, because after they moved to that house, Wallen had it wired for every place. I mean, music coming out of the walls practically. And Berkeley had a radio, KRE radio station, and all of the radio stations played dance music on the weekends, and we danced, and we well, after Prohibition was repealed, we drank wine, and people brought crackers and cheese, and that was it. And we had an awfully good time. And we used to hike weekends, and that was fun, especially the night of a full moon. We'd hike in the Berkeley Hills. There were very few obstructions then in the way of houses. And I don't know. I guess when you're going through things, you just make the best of it. And well, I know on my $100 a month, I lived very well. And then when I had a roommate, I was probably even a little better. But I don't know. I think there was more, what shall I say, down-to-earth living experiences than there are now. Everything seems to me now to be so artificial.
What do you
in the
mean?
way of amusement.
Oh,
I look at these horrible affairs on TV, the dancing and the noise, and it's...
what kind of dances did you do?
Well, there was such a thing as a waltz and a two-step,
Mm-hmm.
and it was fun. And I can't see dancing where your partner's across the room practically. Ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And there were movies, 25 cents to go to the United Artists, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And there were good movies. But that, I suppose, makes one, well, I mean, I think it makes me show my age, because the older generation presumably thinks that the present is not as good as the past.
You agree with that?
Well, I don't think that the good old days were all that good. I would hate to not have a washing machine and a dishwasher and non-pressable clothes. There are a lot of things that I'm glad we have. But then there are values that have gone away, I think, in the course of this modern kind of life. I don't know.
You want to talk about that? What, like, that is not an unusual feeling about the past. So,
No.
but we don't know exactly what values, you know.
Well, for one thing, our attitude toward education, I mean, that is something I think was better once than it seems to be now.
In what way?
Well, children are learning to, or did learn to read and write when I was coming along, which apparently they're not doing now.
It would be nice to talk about what you felt when you went to school. Just how did school, the idea of going to school, what it meant to you. You know, because you've had a lot of education.
Oh, from the time I was little, I couldn't wait to go to school because, well, one day when I was 5 years old, I woke up and there weren't any children in the neighborhood. And I'd heard something about something called school, so I just decided to go. And my mother decided that that was where I had gone, and she came charging after me. It was a neighborhood school. And the principal, a very understanding man, he said, "Don't worry about her. She'll get tired of it and she won't go anymore." And so I went for 2 or 3 days, and I got hurt on the, well, they had a fire steps coming down from the second floor onto the schoolyard, and I swung around on these steps and broke open my forehead. And by the time I was over that, I had the whooping cough.
How old were you then?
I was 5.
Oh.
And so then my mother found this German English school. And if it had been Chinese, I would have gone there. She thought I should have a second language. And besides, it was skatable from home. And I loved skating. So I went there until well, it was a small school, 2 rooms, and the first 3 grades in one room, and 4 through 8 in the other room. And when I went into the 4th grade, the teacher from the first room went in too, and he was a strict one. And by the time I finished the 7th grade, I knew everything that the 8th grade was having, you know, I had a good memory. So I decided I wanted to go to high school, and I started high school. And the Sister Superior told my mother that if I didn't make it, I could always go back to grammar school. Well, of course, I wasn't going to go back to grammar school. And this was an Episcopal school finishing school well, no, it was from kindergarten through high school for girls in Portland, Episcopal Church. And so I went there until I came to Berkeley and fell in love with Berkeley.
You said you fell in love with Berkeley. What?
Well, there were red geraniums up to the 2nd story window in the house at St. Margaret's house. And St. Margaret's house was an Episcopal training school for deaconesses, but there were only about 6 girls there who wanted to be deaconesses, and they took in boarders, university students, both in the house, and then they had built a kind of dormitory, 2-story dormitory, across the back of the property. And one got to that on a covered walkway. And I had one of the little rooms. It was about the size of this dining room, with a desk and a chair, and a little gas heater, and that was it. And the bed was out on the sleeping porch, which went the length of this 2-story building on both floors. And the heads of the beds were against the rooms, and there was a canvas curtain that you could roll down between each bed, and then a canvas curtain at the railing to keep out the rain in the wintertime. And it was very seldom down because everybody liked sleeping out there. It was wonderful. Of course, it wasn't good for my hair. I came down here with a Marcel. And
What's a Marcel?
oh dear, a Marcel is a...
You're from the flapper era.
Yeah, I sure am. A Marcel was a very tight wave done on Marcel irons. And my hair was straight, very straight. And my mother and I came down from Portland to Berkeley on a boat. By the time I got here, my Marcel was gone, and so my Aunt Jessie took me down to Taft and Pennoyer, and I got a new Marcel when I came out to Berkeley. And the first night on the sleeping porch, the fog rolled in, and my Marcel disappeared. So I put up with that for a little while, and then I found a barber, Jake, on next to the corner of Telegraph, next to the corner of Bancroft on the west side of the street. And Jake was a nice guy, and he cut my hair off until it was short all around with bangs. And all I had to do was get out of bed and shake my head. And for years, that was what I had, till my mother came down here and looked at me, and she said, you know, when a woman gets to be 40, she needs something fluffy around her face. So I went out and had a permanent wave, I think the last of the machine waves.
Coming here to Berkeley, that's what you cover in the book with Jacomena, you know, the 4-year stretch. And you've been doing a lot of writing, actually.
No, not really.
Well,
I, of course, had the brilliant idea when I was a child that I wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer, and of course, one really wants to write the great American novel, which has never been done. But I've discovered, I tried writing a mystery story once, and I don't have any imagination, and I don't have a light touch. And my attempt at fiction sounded like the briefs I wrote in law school. Terrible. Until I got to writing about Claire. That seemed to go very well. It's certainly not great literature, but
Who
it's...
is Claire?
Oh, my husband. After he died, I thought that it would be nice. Well, his son said to me one day that he was going to miss coming here to dinner and sitting at this table and listening to his father's stories about his career. And I knew that Claire did not save anything. As a matter of fact, that was a weakness of the family. I had a hard time finding anything written, really. And so most of this was a result of what I remembered, of what Claire talked about and what we did while we were married.
How did you meet him?
I met him in Boalt Hall Library, the old Boalt Hall on the campus, because I was working then as an editor at Bancroft Whitney Company. And Bancroft Whitney Company is a publisher of law books. And I decided after 12 years at the Gazette that I ought to do something about my training. So, and this was after the WPA, and I looked up the law firms in the San Francisco phone book, and I picked out the ones with 3 names or more, thinking that they might have a library or need some research. And also, I wrote a letter to, I wrote about 46 letters, I guess, and one to Bancroft Whitney, which I really wanted. And Bancroft Whitney replied that they had no opening right then, but they would keep me in mind. But I had a number of other replies and even a few interviews with lawyers in the city, but of course nothing happened. And then a friend of mine asked me what I was doing, and I told him that I had done all this, and he said, well, would you like to work at Bancroft Whitney? And I said I'd rather work there than any place because of the books and the printing and all that sort of thing. And so he said, well, would a letter from him help any? And I said it couldn't do any harm because he was on the Supreme Court, and Bancroft Whitney had a contract with the Supreme Court to publish their advance sheets and then the bound volumes. And so he must have written to them that afternoon or that day, because the next morning the managing editor's secretary called me and said that Mr. Clark would like to see me. So I went over there, and he hired me for 6 months on probation. And I had a number of different jobs to do. And at the early in June, I was given a job, I think, to do the legislative history of one of the codes. Maybe it was the civil code or the code of civil procedure, I don't remember which, but all I needed was a law library to work in. And we were working 5 days a week. And the first time in my life I ever worked just 5 days a week. Always I'd worked 6 days a week. And so anybody, of course, who needs it can use Boalt Hall Library. And so I brought all my galley proofs and things over. on Friday night, and Saturday morning, bright and early, I was at Boalt Hall Library working. And on Sunday, I was there also. I had a deadline on Monday. And so, I hate to repeat this. Anyway, Sunday I was sitting there working away, and I'd gotten there probably at 8:30 in the morning, and there were very few people around and nobody at my table that I thought of. And pretty soon this voice said, what do you know, or do you know anything about undulant fever? And I said, no, I don't, and I went on working. Pretty soon the same voice said, how would you like a cigarette? So I thought I would. And I looked up, and he looked very attractive. So we went out. We had to leave the library, and we went down a few steps to the first landing and leaned on the windowsill and got acquainted. And my fate was sealed. So anyway, I wrote this biography of him for the sake of his son and grandchildren. And then Jack got the brilliant idea of our doing this other thing. And I must say that for a woman who wanted to write a book or be a writer, I have something that lots of writers don't have. They're both in the Bancroft Library.
This is the book that you
yes.
work on for the Historical Society.
Yeah. Then after the 4-year stretch came out and Bob Yamada went into such ecstasies about it and suggested that I come to a meeting of the board, I did join the Historical Society, and on the mezzanine floor of the Co-op bookstore on Shattuck Avenue, where he was manager, he had the bound copies of the Gazette. And so it occurred to me that I could write an article or two, and so I did. And then pretty soon, I can't remember, it must have been the next year, the board decided to write a book, or to publish a book. And so we had every article that had been published in the Gazette up to that time Xeroxed. And then we sat around this table and threw out the ones that were obviously we didn't want, because we'd set a time frame for the book, 1845 to 1945. So some of the articles obviously wouldn't go, and some just weren't suitable generally. And after, gosh, it must have taken us a year to do this, we got together the ones that we wanted. And then we had to figure out how to put it together and so forth. And then we finally got it suitably put together, and I did the index for it, and came out at the Berkeley Women's City Club. So, and I think it's a darn good book.
Yes. You know, do you think this would be a good place to stop and then shoot, you know, the rooms and things?
Sure.
What do you think? And then, do you think that?
I think we got a lot of stuff.
Because I think we've got a nice tie-in now from the beginning of the Historical Society to the book. You know, what do you think?
It's all right with me.
I mean, would that be good? Because then we can have the rooms. You can, you know, bit of the book to read a little tiny bit.
These are
just in the beginning.
I put these in. These were reactions from people.
Oh, I see. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
This was a thing that I found amazing. There was a young man, among many young men, who lived at Jack's around 1981. he was majoring in German, and he was going to go to Germany after he graduated, which was why he was majoring in German. His father is the mentholatum company in Buffalo, New York, and Bumper, his name was Edward, but he said that all of his family had these funny nicknames, and his was Bumper. So he was a dear. He had what I would call bedroom eyes and a voice to go with it. And of course, he was in his early 20s, and here we were, a couple of old ladies in our 70s. Anyway, he graduated and he went to Germany, and then we got a wedding announcement. He was marrying a Swedish gal he had met several years before over there. And Jack said, let's send Bumper a copy of our book. So we get this back. And he said, Dear Jackie and Flo, again, procrastination got the best of me in responding to your beautiful wedding present to both Anita and myself. We both read your Cal memoirs, which I'm sure I found more entertaining, and I in particular am pleased you took the time of putting such experiences down on paper, as they are indeed gone with the wind. I perceive these Cal memoirs as images of a lifestyle that existed never to return in a land of real people and places that today have been replaced by the lost and lonely. I'm only sorry I was not around during that time. While I feel the quality of life far surpasses that which we see today, I can only be thankful for the 2 years I was fortunate to have known two people whose personalities and lives still emanate a full life of memories that included what America was meant to have been. Enough daydreaming. Well, I was so amazed because this showed that Bumper had grown up considerably, but this is amazing to me. And then last year, I think it was a year ago, I was sitting here one evening after dinner, the phone rang, and it was Bumper. He said, I'm at Jack's, and he said, I want to come up and see you. So he came up in a few minutes, and he spent about an hour here. And he had come over, he hadn't told anybody he was coming, and he walked in at Jack's at dinner time, hoping that somebody would be there. And as it happened, Walter, who is an awfully nice young man living there, and another one were there. And Bumper was so happy. Well, the next day he took us to lunch at His Lordship, and I tell you, I felt as though I were 20 again. He was so delightful, so devoted, sort of. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
What a nice young man. He had $500 a month allowance while he was at Cal, and he couldn't get along on that. And it doesn't cost much to live at Jack's. I must say, she does a beautiful job for her kids. But Bumper was something else. Good. I have novels from there across, and then 2 more shelves, and then biographies, autobiographies, and letters, and poetry, and essays, and history. But of course it goes, it goes everywhere now. And so,
how far back does this collection go? When did you start it?
well, some of them, my Dumas, Three Musketeers, goes back to my childhood. Well, and until the 40s, I didn't have too much money to buy things. The cheapest books then were the Modern Library for 95 cents, and then the larger one, $1.25. But Claire and I bought books like mad, and then, well, I guess I managed to buy them. I went without lunch for once in a while to get a book I wanted. So, don't you love him? She gave me that when I was in the hospital first time. In my family, my father was the one who started me on the downward path. He read to me every night. He carried me to bed until my legs got too long, and then I had to sit beside him, and then he read. And he had a wonderful reading voice. And he started me on detective stories as well as literature. So I think that's probably as good a legacy as one can have. Good picture of Jack. This was my dearest friend in high school, and she's coming down for Christmas. She still lives in Portland. Ooh, bright light. Don't do this. This is, my leg still has to be bandaged about every other day anyway. Aren't they wonderful? They make you feel good just to look at them.
Where did they come from?
Well, they're meerkats from southern Africa. They look as though they were waiting for a bus or something.
It's amazing the way they stand up.
Yeah. And they're only about, I think they're less than 2 feet tall.
Oh.
And they're rodents, but they have a very particular family feeling. They all, well, they look out for each other. I think they're marvelous. I wonder if they're good pets.
You want to go into this room? Oh, you want to go
downstairs?
You want to go downstairs?
Yeah, this is where my detective stories are. Oh, gosh.
Can you manage?
Oh, yes. This is a good, strong rail.
Okay. Are we going all the way downstairs?
You want to? See the bus.
Okay.
This is a... Granddaughter lived for 2 different 6 months. Alien.
So what is this collection?
This is all mystery. As you can see, I'm running out of space. These books here are, well, their virtue is that the authors are dead. So, never gonna have any more. This is Dorothy Sayers. This is the Charlie Chan